'Cause you're listening to Jams and Tea, you won't see the show on your TV, so we talk about things musically. 'Cause you're listening to Jams and Tea, you're listening to Jams and Tea.
Welcome everybody to a brand new Record Club episode of the JMC podcast, and today we are going to be covering August's recommended record. If you haven't seen the main episode that came out on the same day as today, go and check that out first and then come right back here, because August, why don't you tell us a little bit about why you have selected this medieval torture device in the form of MP3 files?
Okay, so to understand the Shaggs is to understand the backstory, which starts in the backwoods of New Hampshire with a young man named Austin Wiggin Jr. Basically, one day, he went to his mom, who was a supposed psychic, who offered to give him a palm reading. She gave him this palm reading, and she gave him 3 predictions. 1, he would marry a strawberry blonde woman. 2, they would have 3 daughters. 3, after this mother died, the daughters would form like Voltron to create a popular musical project.
I thought you were going to say they would Voltron together to make a new wife.
I believe the term for that would be Frankenstein.
I'm just taken aback by the fact that this 1930s psychic said Voltron.
Yeah, no, she was also very.
He did say she was psychic.
Yeah, she was a psychic. Come on, buddy.
Yeah.
I see it in my future. Very cheap animation.
Anyways, the names of these daughters were Dorothy, or Dot, who performs the vocals and guitar on this record, Betty, who does vocals and rhythm guitar, and Helen, who does drums. But what's interesting is, all 3 of these predictions came true in one monkey's paw way or another. And he marries his strawberry blonde wife, has these 3 daughters. She dies. He takes them out of school, cuts off their access to popular culture and music, and forces them to make a just uncut gem of their creativity, a completely detached album from the popular culture, to create the record Philosophy of the World. Notably, when they went in for studio sessions, the producer was appalled at their complete lack of musical talent and suggested that perhaps they take lessons. And he initially didn't want to charge Austin, who was adamant about, no, I'm paying you, we're recording this, and we're putting it on wax. And thus, in 1969, this record comes out, met with on a limited pressing of 1,000 copies, which did not sell well. Surprising, I know.
How much those go for now?
Probably a lot.
About 100 of which were distributed to radio stations, and
who promptly said no thank you.
Who promptly put most of those in the trash. And as the years went by, in 1975, Austin, their father, dies, the band falls apart, and
tragic.
And basically, no one, for a while, there was this limbo of people just kind of not remembering this, until notably, Frank Zappa says that he thought the Shaggs were better than the Beatles. And then we see artists like Kurt Cobain listing this as one of his favorite albums ever. and we see this slow accumulation and of this record's popularity as it comes back into the limelight in around the 80s when it got its first reissue on vinyl proper. And the rest, as they say, is history, which I will let you guys get into as you want.
Well, one thing I think is interesting is because you mentioned that the girls were cut off from access to kind of popular culture and to what popular music was sounding like. I think that's an interesting point because I don't think this record is kind of like completely lacking in the conventions of the era's rock music. Yeah. Like there is definitely rudimentary understandings, very rudimentary understandings of things like chord progressions. I really have to emphasize the rudimentary in that regard, and
yeah,
specifically how to tune an instrument.
Well, yeah, there's absolutely no attempt made to tune the instruments, which is hilarious. But specifically with regard to the drumming as well, which I'll get to, but is obviously completely out of time with everything else consistently. But there are like, you know, very basic patterns that are being played that, you know, you would presumably have to learn somewhere.
Yeah, no. So, and that is an interesting point to note.
I don't think this sounds like a record made by a bunch of people who are given instruments, told to practice, and then just put in a recording booth. I think there's a little bit more thought put into it than just that. Like there is, I think, a genuine attempts at creative expression here. They're just incredibly hammered by the fact that there's, for one thing, there's no clear musical talent involved, but also just there's no clear understanding of the fundamentals of music and the fundamentals of what makes music good. And that is likely due in part to a lack of access to, I mean, the way you kind of learn about music and the way you learn to play music, the fastest way is just to absorb as much of it as you can and really kind of soak it in. And obviously learning about the fundamentals of music is important too, but there are some great musicians who haven't even done that and still make great music. So you need to be exposing yourself, and that's clearly not been happening for the most part. But it is worth, I think, mentioning that these girls were preparing to make a record, or the band existed for a number of years before this record.
They began in 1967 is the precise year. So 2 years before the recording of
this. So still a number. I thought it was a bit longer, but no, that's fair. So that they came into being a few years before the record itself was released, and so they had some time to kind of get used to, you know, learning their instruments and learning how to be in a band. And the results is I think a really fascinating musical experiment, or like, and not a musical experiment in the sense that, you know, they're experimenting, but in the sense that it's kind of like a psychological experiment or like a case study of, you know,
endurance test.
Well, yeah, it's like kind of like a case study in terms of like what would music sound like filtered through these very specific limitations or limited exposures to culture. Like what would people imagine? What kind of music would people make if they weren't, you know, exposed to culture for the most part? So I think that's purely an intellectually interesting thing. It doesn't make the experience of listening to the record any easier or qualitatively better or worse for that matter. It's just, I think, an interesting aspect of it. This is a fucking ear sore. It's a fucking not to be, you know, original or anything, but this thing is fucking endurance test. You're right, Morgan. It's absolutely painful consistently, but it's also I think a lot of the cult appeal, and I think there's some people who genuinely find something truly meaningful in the music, whether that it was intentionally put there or not. Like I think Kurt Cobain, for instance, definitely sees some kind of like innocent quality in the music that fascinates him.
I think Frank Zappa was just shit posting.
As is his want.
No, I mean,
Well, like, I think
it's also notable he was not ever a pronounced fan of the Beatles. So.
Yeah, I think Zappa was more using it as an excuse to kind of point out what be transgressive and point out like what his ideas about what music should be versus commercialized canned pop stuff. It was very much a sentiment that was being expressed in the underground at that time. But anyway, there's a lot about this record that's fascinating in that way, and I believe probably does have a true emotional connection to certain people in that way. But I also think a big part of the appeal of this record, probably the biggest part of the appeal of this record, if we're honest, is just how fucking hilarious it is.
Yeah.
Like, this thing is fucking comedy in so many ways. I think the funniest part of the whole record is specifically the way that the drumming is so mismatched with everything else that's happening in the songs.
Oh my god, it's the worst fucking thing about this record. It sucks.
It sucks. But it's also like for instance, in the opening title track, the way you have this relentless drum pattern just hammering, like almost industrial, like purely and descriptively, not intentionally, obviously, but the way it just kind of hammers on and on and on, and the song is like completely incongruous with it. It's just so fucking funny. I can't listen to it without laughing.
Because the guitar pattern's going like da 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 da, and the drums like do 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 do.
Now hold on. Now let's unpack that phrase there. You said patterns when you said guitar. I don't know about that one.
That's a fair point. That's a fair point.
But the thing is, like, there will occasionally be like one song where the drumming is kind of in time, and then the guitar stops to do something in a different time signature, and the drums keep going.
The problem is you can't attribute time signature to any of these compositions.
Truly a polyrhythmic record.
Yeah, I'm just trying to like express what happens, not necessarily the composition.
So true. And I think you're right. There are certainly points. I wouldn't say songs, but there are points within some songs where there's like occasionally this moment of like a very brief, interesting musical idea is expressed and then completely left behind. And that's fascinating in the sense that it's entirely accidental. It's not like with Beefheart where if something like that happened in a Beefheart record, that would be an intentional inclusion to subvert expectations or to fuck with the audience. But here, when things like that happen, they're purely accidental, which I think is so much more interesting.
I mean, but at the same time, like I've listened to interviews with the members of the Shaggs, notably John Johnson did a great interview in the book Lost at Sea with the members of the Shaggs, and basically they were very, very clear in that what the record ended up being is exactly what the dad wanted, and in a very Beefheart-ish manner, he would drill them on it day and night, refusing them certain amenities until they got the way he wanted it. So even though this record is not very, like, the drums not being in time, this was what their dad wanted.
No, it's absolutely his uncut vision.
That's a very good point, actually, well considered. And that's touches on another good point, which I'm sure will come up plenty of times in our discussion, is that this record is the product of years of abuse, basically. There's no way of getting around that. It's not some kind of, to the extent to which it is some kind of conceptualized thing, has very little to do with the intentions or desires of the performers on the record, which is not to take away from any of the decisions that they make or any of the musicality that they might have outside of this record, because it sure as shit isn't on it. This is still ultimately the product of it's difficult to think about it in the same way you'd think about any other record where the performers are a part of their compositional process, or at least, or even with like covers records, you still have the performers are still kind of performing their own take on the material, whereas this is just like material being dictated essentially. And yeah, and as I was saying about the drumming on this record, weirdly enough, I think that in and of itself, it might be the most, relatively speaking, instrumentally competent thing.
Oh yeah, definitely.
If you
No.
isolate it from the rest of the music around it, it's just the way that it's placed in the songs, or the way that it's happening in the songs, that causes so much of the discord and so much of the awful effect of it. I think a particularly potent example of this is in the song I Am So Happy When You're Near, which is this very kind of slow moving ballad, but it has Helen Wiggins just doing this really fast-paced thing, and occasionally she throws in like a fill, like a proper drum fill or a roll, and it's like you can clearly tell that she's quite proud of being able to pull off these fills when they happen, but it's like it's just complete. It's so incongruous with everything else happening in the song. This kind of sort of sad love ballad, and it has this fucking beat. It's so fucking
That's the
funny.
word I would use to describe this record. Is fucking sad.
The vocal in terms of other aspects of this record, the vocal melodies on this record are staggeringly incompetent. They have almost the feel of constant improvisation, as though each sentence does not know where it will end, which is interesting as well when you consider the fact that this was orchestrated. At points it sounds like primitive AI attempting to imitate human speech patterns. One interesting instrumental note is that there's only one track on here which features bass performed by Rachel Wiggin, who I presume may be their mother. I don't know who Rachel Wiggin is, if there's only three sisters. But
yeah, no, I did some research, and I could not find out for the life of me who Rachel Wiggins is.
Okay, well, there you go. She plays bass on That Little Sports Car, and only That Little Sports Car. But if you didn't notice, then I wouldn't blame you, because it's so fucking muted you can barely detect it.
No.
Fucking Jason Newsted wept.
Yeah, I can imagine Lars Ulrich listening to this track and thinking, yeah, this is the sound that we need.
James, come over here and listen to this. This isn't stock.
This.
Anyway, at points, I have to say, at certain points, the unconventional vocal melodies are almost interesting, but they inevitably fall flat because they just don't have an end point. They sort of circle aimlessly. But for instance, you can hear, I think, sort of shades of the way that future artists like Bjork, for instance, would play with unconventional vocal melodies and weird melodic phrasings, but obviously much more purposefully in her music. It's kind of like a weird sort of afterbirth version of that. That's kind of like just muddled. And again, I think some of the things that are so fascinating in this record are things that are either unintentional or just dumb luck.
One thing that's interesting is I want to briefly touch on the accents here.
Sure.
How words are pronounced and enunciated. Like my pal Foot becomes my pal Foot.
Yeah.
Or like I don't think this is how people from the coast talk. I just
no one talks like this.
No,
no one.
It's not a thing.
I just don't know what's going on with like the specific enunciation of the words. It's so fascinating.
It sounds like childish the way that so much of this record is enunciated and spoken. It feels like this is a record that feels like a 5-year-old just walked up to me and asked about the birds and the bees for the first time, and I have to tell them, talk to your parents, please, but stay away from me.
Yeah.
Yeah, if the toddler was currently ODing on Zoloft, maybe.
Speaking of parents,
What do you OD on Zoloft?
Take enough.
Speaking of parents, there's this.
Speaking of parents, there's the song "Who Are Our Parents," which I think is an interesting song given the story of the band. It's kind of almost sadistic the way that this was kind of composed by their father, and this kind of song music on the it's interesting in that sense, because obviously it has some sort of significance with regard to the narrative of the record, but I mean it's just another
it literally says some kids think their parents are cruel just because they want them to obey certain rules. They start to learn from ones who really care, turning to the ones who will always be there.
It's
like
so
Jesus.
It's like it's kind of like, it's so fucking creepy. It reminds me of like when you're like 12, you still believe in Santa Claus, and you're like, does he really always watch me? Like, really?
Yeah.
Like, what?
And I want to say on the note of the kind of abuse that lead to the
fuck does he get his fat ass down the chimney?
I want to say on the note of the abuse that was imperative to the creation of this record, that it would be the reason why I think it's appropriate to discuss this and not just too fucking morbid is the fact that though bewildered by the success of this record, the Wiggins sisters have kind of gone on to embrace the success that it has in a certain way. And there was an archival release in the 80s of recordings that they made in the mid 70s called Shaggs' Own Thing, where they re-recorded certain songs on this record and also played some covers. And I haven't actually heard it, but from what I understand, it's apparently a much comparatively more musically competent record, which I think speaks volumes to why this record in particular, one of the reasons anyway, why this record in particular sounds so bad is that it is the delusional vision of a man who has no idea what music should sound like. It's purely following a whim based on a fucking fortune teller. And is
let's talk briefly about the past musical experience of Arthur Wiggins Jr.
Please,
because his past musical experience is limited to he played the Jew's harp a little bit when he was younger, and that is the entire breadth of his musical experience.
Maybe this would have been better if you played the Jew's harp on it. Who knows?
Who knows? I mean,
anyway,
possible.
Yeah, and we've already alluded to the song, very briefly alluded to the song My Pal Foot Foot, or My Pal Foot Foot, which is interesting because I think it's one of the most, relatively speaking, notorious tracks on the record in terms of people who are fans of this record seem to single this track out, I guess, and because it's like one of the most obviously hilarious tracks on the record. I mean, I'll save the discussion of this for people who have more to say about it, but I will suffice it to say there are cassette tape recordings of me singing improvised songs on the fly at age 6, and they sound remarkably similar to My Pal Foot Foot.
Philosophy of New Zealand coming when.
Yeah. Once again, you get Helen Wiggins' drums highlighted on parts of this track, and they are the cure for depression. Anyway, throughout this record, the way that the guitars are kind of locked in synchrony with the vocal melodies, like following them every single step of the way, is really strange. It creates this jarring effect of frigid, nauseating layering. These two things, guitars and vocals, are not complementing each other, but simply enhancing the individual incompetence of each other. It never feels entirely chaotic, though. The girls have, I think, as I said earlier, a very rudimentary understanding of rhythm and song structure. But I think ultimately that's what lends the whole thing a strangely attractive quality. And I say that with a big fucking asterisk, obviously. The experience is like observing a pile up of vehicles and admiring the angularity of the way that they're all collided while ignoring the bloodied bodies inside each of them.
Damn, just like Tetris.
That sounds stupid, I realize, but these are the kind of places that this music puts my mind. It is bracingly inept, yet it is in a way that's fascinating in spite of itself. I think if I were to circle out a highlight, relatively speaking, on this record, I would say that I think the track Why Do I Do is slightly better than anything else here, if only for its lack of repetition. And it does have, I think, some semi-decent harmonies, vocal harmonies in this track at certain points. And I will say, I don't think this is the worst album we've ever reviewed. The story of the Shaggs is fascinating and sad. And the rigid angularity of the way this record sounds belies a band that are basically performing at the whim of their father, because they have been forced to try and realize a dream that he imposed on them. It's a fascinating and deeply unsettling and saddening psychological exercise, and I wish to never listen to it ever again as long as I live.
It's funny that, like, first of all, I just need to, like, maybe just to throw ourselves a bone in a bit of discussion here, just because, like, I don't really imagine that there's going to be any takes here that we're going to be like, well, actually, I highly doubt that, though I will say, Tyler, August, maybe it's because I am easily the most plebby person here when it comes to knowledge of actual instrumentation and how these things work on a technical level. But if y'all think the drumming is actually the closest thing this album gets to good, you're on fucking crack. This is awful. I know that it's comparative.
I will not have my words misconstrued. I did not say the drumming was good.
You did not. I didn't say you said that. I said comparatively.
So Jake, then I must ask the follow-up question. What do you think is the closest element this record gets to good?
Okay, it's not even an element, it's a moment. Oh. It's a moment on the song Halloween.
Oh, yes!
Because their vocals actually harmonize for one line. One. You get one on the entire album.
Also, at the same time, like, that song is kind of like goofy and tongue-in-cheek and silly. Yeah. So I'm more willing to go with it.
It's like a song that if it was performed and, like, put together competently would make it onto some old, like, 70-year-old compilation album that would feature all, like, the Monster Mash. Like, that is the closest I can imagine that to being that. However, I will say, Tyler, it's interesting you sort of point out that, like, this is not outsider art, which is like an actual thing where people who have not been exposed to society or rules or other artistic expressions just create without any actual knowledge of boundaries or any, like, foundation, and it can create some fascinating things. There's, like, a guy who I'd seen, I think he was in, like, I think he might have been in, like, Europe or something, and he basically just, like, painted, but instead of using a canvas, he used his entire house. And it's, like, the most weird cubic fucking creation I've ever seen. This is not that, because there is, like, it's all incompetent, sure, but it's also like, oh, this is the worst possible version of music that's in the vein of, well, the Beatles, early stuff mostly, the Beach Boys. Basically, this is like if you had a toddler and you walked through a supermarket and they played a Beach Boys song on the supermarket, and then you took the toddler, gave her a guitar, and said, play a song that sounds like that. That is all 12 cuts on this record. And I think the only compliment I will afford it is that it is, in fact, 32 minutes long. That said, it is, I mean, again, Tyler said it, it's comedy gold with the lyrics. Even the instrumentation is funny, but the lyrics, like, the philosophy of the world, the title track is like, it's we live in a society. It's the meme. It's fucking, are the rich people, they want what the poor people want.
Which doesn't make sense, let's point out.
You know, the fat people want what the skinny people got.
And the skinny people want, like, there's this sort of, like, you know, it's trying to do this structural thing where it's trying to be like, oh, it's the opposite thing. But it's like, no, that's not how these things work. And you just sort of immediately are greeted to the complete lack of it sounds like each individual instrument was recorded in like a different continent, and the other people hadn't heard what the other ones sound like for like a bass line, and they just sort of did it. Which it holds some kind of value in that respect, I guess.
And
but there's also
reminiscent of the Farrah Abraham record, which was also had vocals recorded without hearing the instrumentation.
That's
and
true.
Even then, Farrah Abraham does not approach the levels of a musical that this does. And like, again, Farrah sung about things. In fact, she sung about very emotionally poignant things, and sometimes did it even very effectively. There's the second track on here, which is just, you see a sports car, you follow it, it goes. That's the song.
To be fair, like early Beach Boys stuff is rudimentary lyrically in the same way. So
Sure.
Like it's oh, look how beautiful the girls are.
Good there either.
You know, I'm not saying this is why the song's actually good. I'm just saying, like, to be fair, I think that the writing in a song like that is one of the least bad things about it.
Yeah, sure. But it's also like,
why not?
The improvisational quality kind of shines through, because it's like, it sounds like they were given half of the part of like every song, like half of a verse, half of a chorus, or half of whatever. And then they were like, okay, we have the halves of these. Improvise the second half where you have to think of something that rhymes, which leads to the fact that every time there's like a rhyme scheme on here, if there even is one, which there often isn't, it'll just be like, I walked up to the tree sat beside me. It's like it's literally like listening to,
and I bought myself a hat.
it's like listening to the Eminem freestyle at points where you're just like, was that really the best thing you could come up with?
What's really funny about the rhyme schemes often on this record is that they will be lines that rhyme, but they won't even pronounce the rhyme.
No, and that goes back to like the weird pronunciation shit. They'll rhyme it, but they just pronounce it like fucking aliens.
It's so fuck. There's a part on "I'm So Happy When You Are Near," which is like maybe the best written track on there, because it at least conveys an emotion other than like just a thing that exists. But there's I know it has to be, I know it can't be changed, but sometimes I think we are beat completely insane.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh honey, I really don't think that lyric has aged well.
They think we want werewolf on them.
There's things I wonder, which is like, they are literally just saying things. Like, there's no idea in this song. It's just like, do you ever think?
Just posting.
It's true. And
fuck off, I don't believe in that nonsense.
It's so fucking strange to like, you listen to shit like Sweet Thing and it's just like, okay, this is
Sweet thing.
Sweet Thing is like, it's like a story of an abusive relationship, which again, I
mean, yeah.
Which is funny because it's like the closest it comes to like truly like hitting something, and then immediately it just goes into "It's Halloween." It's just like, oh,
I love Phoebe Bridgers.
I hate you.
Yeah.
How fucking dare you, even as a joke.
Then it's kind of Lou Reedy when I think about it, actually.
Fucking Lulu type beat. But I think one of my favorite moments on the record is just the ghosts will spook, the spooks will scare. Why, even Dracula will be there. And I'm just like, dude, this party sounds lit. Dracula, ghosts, spooks. I don't know how you like, what makes a ghost different from a spook? Who fucking knows? I want to find out.
My theory is that you have spooks and you have Dracula and then the band Ghost who are there.
There's
wait. It's Halloween. We need to briefly address the best line on the album. all the
Which-
children are happy and gay.
And I mean, look, if this is nothing but a podcast of happy gay children, I don't know what it is. But I would like to point out that there's also where they talk about the things attending the party. There are, witches, goblins, vampires, devils, Frankensteins, multiple zombies. Then there's also tramps, Cinderellas, Cinderellas, plural Cinderella, pirates.
I think they meant
Cinderella.
Frankenstein's monsters.
And angels and gypsies, which I don't really know what they have to do with Halloween, but sure, fine,
That's
angels and gypsies work.
That's fucking racist.
A little bit. And I love just even just the titles alone. You look at an album that's philosophy of the world, and then you have a song that's called Why Do I Feel? And I ask myself this question frequently, Mr. Shaggs.
It has a really big dude with a beard with an acoustic guitar and an open mic in my local cafe energy.
I stand by my statement that that's the best song on the album.
No, that's the thing. You're probably right. Because it's it is again by virtue of the fact that it is surrounded by other worse songs. It is indeed one of the more coherent ideas, but it also is just it asks you, why do I do the things that I do so many times? It's just I love Mother of the World by Swans.
What?
We have a savior, I want to point out, though. It's just,
yeah.
y'all motherfuckers need Jesus, said the Shaggs. Which they never, directly mention, I don't believe.
No, they don't
just
mention Jesus.
There is a savior. He does exist. So why? I mean, it's so fucking funny that they're just so why do you even do a bad thing? Because Jesus? I mean, why do you steal when Jesus?
They should
Perhaps
say that
the Shaggs
to their
are referring
own.
to Muhammad. The Shaggs are Muslims.
If their point is, why do you do bad things? Because Jesus. And their father is in the room, forcing
the
them.
only thing keeping a person being good is the promise of a divine reward, then brother, that person is a piece of shit.
Fucking.
Is that a quote? But I agree with it.
That's True Detective. That's Russ Cole.
Yeah. Well, I agree with him. He's right.
Well, I mean, that's the premise. That's the song. It's why do people go on sinning? Why do they feel sad and blue? Don't they know we have a savior just watching over me and you? Have you ever tried just not being depressed because Jesus? I mean,
the cure-all.
I've tried. It don't work.
Anyway,
motherfuckers tell me I need Jesus, like I ain't know. It's Brockhampton, everybody. Good night. Morgan has left the building. His knee is the only thing that remains.
I like how
my pal Foot.
Yeah.
I like how this hasn't been like a 1-by-1. I like how this hasn't really been a 1-by-1. We've kind of talked.
Yeah,
no,
that's fitting for this.
It's only appropriate for an album that's just if you tried to break it down to it's so essential in its components, it would just be us listing observations about it to the point where it would be the guitar here is bad. The lyrics are bad.
I mean, there's
I don't have
literally
talking points. I have nothing to say.
There's literally points where it's so out of tune. I feel like every chord is a major seventh, even though it's not meant to be.
What's I think most interesting about the way the instrumentation sounds on this record is it's fucking bad, but the fact that this was all meticulously rehearsed.
Mm-hmm.
These girls were made to play these songs over and over and over, and I think you can tell. I don't think, I think there are definitely points where aspects of it sound quote unquote improvised, but I think for the most part, you can tell the rigorous practice that has gone into this.
Yeah.
I think it really comes out
evocative of the free jazz of Ornette Coleman.
Wow.
Fuck off.
But the thing is, it feels like a record that is the epitome of like your 14-year-old has gotten the lead in a school production of Macbeth, and you've drilled him on the monologues every day. So he just goes out there and goes, "Is this a dagger I see before me? The handle towards my hand."
And he
Can't let me
sucks.
touch
And he's
this."
awful.
And
I
it's just
think-
because he's learned it by rote, and all of the emotion is gone.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think you can. I think that angularity that I talked about, like the way that, for instance, the guitar melody is locked into the vocal melody, and they're just kind of synchronized in this really monotonous way. I think that's one of the ways in which you can tell the real practice that's gone into this. They're like in sync, and they're doing this nonsense
That's
melody.
what the dad must have told them to do, is just like, I want you to sing and I want you to play a note every time they say a syllable. And then that's what they actually did.
Yeah, and it's like they did that for
Morgan.
the two girls who play guitars, and then it's
Not
like,
to drums.
and then it's like he's like, oh shit, you have to have drums in a song, but I don't know anything about drums. Fuck, just
As if he knew anything about any other form of instrumentation.
There's like one song where it just
fucking-
starts off with like a bunch of fucking fills, and it's just like, dude, what is happening? It's just like da-dum, ba-bum, ba-dum, ba-bum, ba-bum, ba-ba-da-dum,
it's like
bum,
there are like moments of like drum soloing on this record. I think that's just where they forgot to, where the music kind of just trailed off. Like there's one such moment in My Pal Foot Foot, I think, which I think is really really nice. But yeah,
Do you?
beautiful stuff.
My pal Foot feels like someone narrating an episode of Pingu on acid.
It makes me feel. Oh, Morgan.
Before we get too far off track here, I have something I'd like to note, which
Please.
is that typically in the recording process, you record your instruments separately. Now, I don't know if this was the practice here, but typically the drums come first, which is logical. I assume that's what happened here. And even when you have played a part a billion times, when you have drilled it however many times, when you're playing it by yourself when recording, it gets a little fucked up. And the fact that you're playing it by yourself means that even somebody who is drilling it into you might not really notice. So, you know, while that I'm certain because of their own testimony that it was drilled into them in this way, I can't fully get on board with the notion that every single aspect of this album was Mr. Who's Is What's Its vision. Or
Shag.
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, he might just not have known that it wasn't right because he's hearing the track individually.
I mean,
suppose.
motherfucker just could have been tone deaf. That's a very distinct possibility.
That's a very
Well,
distinct
he was
possibility, but some of this is to
Clearly
do with
insane.
rhythm as well. And from experience, I can tell you that you have to be able to see the whole thing in your mind before you start, and so you know when it's not right, which he evidently didn't. But I just want to say one thing about my experience listening to this record, because I agree. I love the fact that it's a conversation. I just want to get this in before we converse some more, which is that the first time I listened to this record this week, I was in a state of, to be frank, near like suicidal depression. And the first track started, Philosophy of the World, and I started laughing and I started smiling and I felt better about the world immediately. And in part, this record is just funny, but also there's a naivety to it that I found incredible. Like in less 1990, but like Hi, How Are You, Daniel Johnson, that kind of naivety of that's purposeful in his music, at least, that's a sort of very simple, very bright-eyed. I found it mildly inspiring. I don't know, it made me feel better about the world. I can't hate the record because it did that for me.
I'm glad that it had that effect on you, because for me personally, if you want to know why I listened to jazz a lot this week, it was because every time I had to listen to this album, I put on Kind of Blue to remind myself what music was. And I would also like to say that I had the opposite effect of when I first heard it. I was at work and I was in the stockroom, and thank you, August. Now there is a section in the stockroom of where I work where there are placeholder boxes for shoes if we get their normal boxes fucked up. And I just took my box cutter and was just like shit out of that fucking box with that box cutter because it was so fucking maddening.
Okay, so that's going to be known as the Shaggs section of the store from now on.
No one will ever see that but me, but I find it very funny. Just like someone finding it and being like, what the fuck happened?
It was the Shaggs.
Me alone in my room just being like, it hurt me. I had to hurt something back. I have been listening to this, the New Black Dresses, and watching Hannibal all week. Do you know where my mind has been?
Next week it's not going to be better.
I do, Jake. I know exactly.
Tyler and I are the same wavelength of just like, after my third listen of the Shaggs philosophy of the world, everything just kind of locked into place because I'm just so fucking deranged.
There's, when I finished listening to Philosophy of the World for the third time, I understood where the deer visions and Hannibal were coming from.
No, that's you. We have become Will Graham, and to the point where it's just like, is my therapist a cannibal that's gaslighting me? I don't know anymore. What's real? I don't know.
Will Graham,
I
I
am
think
the therapist.
Will Graham, I think you share a lot of emotional common ground with the musicians and the Shaggs with their father.
Poor baby boy.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
All right.
Morgan, you conscious?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. What do you want from me?
I was literally just concerned about you. I was not asking you to speak.
I'm not. No, and that's not a pointed question. It's like, what do you want me to say about this, man? It sucks ass. Yeah, it makes me like the way that God bless you, Jake. It's just an opinion, and I think pretty much any reaction out of whatever the hell this is valid. But like, I would take the drums over the guitar work on this album any day of the week. At least the drums are in tune and rhythm with itself, I guess. And that's mainly the issue, is that just tune your guitars, please. I know none of you know how to. Please, just it hurt.
Morgan is the guitar guy, so this bothering him more than anyone is definitely pronounced.
Oh,
yeah.
It's not even that I'm like the guitar guy or whatever. This applies to any instrument. If it's not in tune, I want to die. It hurts because I can recognize it immediately and be like, that string in particular, fix that one. Because it's like, it's so easy. It's so easy for me, at least, to be like, yeah, that's the one. Yeah, I mean, this is I had a lot of trouble getting on board the so bad it's good shit posting funny haha train that this album has been riding for decades now, because it's like visibly, like, I didn't know the backstory of it until I looked into it, but like just listening to it before I did that was like, somebody made these people do this. Like, it was just a gut instinct I had. I'm like, no one wanted to be doing this. And, it makes a whole lot of sense that this is the product of years and years of psychotic abuse, because it sounds like Charles Manson's music that he made before he became a serial killer is actually a lot more like cogent than this. But
Yeah, it is.
This is what you imagine that music would sound like.
It's just the fucking, like, I don't know why I guess it's just from the overt music reference, but midway through my first listen of this, I just thought of that scene in Mandy where he's just like, you like the Carpenters? Well, this is better. He just puts on that fucking record and she just trips balls, and I'm like, God, I wish that were me.
The thing is, this record is actually, I think, aiming for like Carpenters.
No,
and
yeah.
That's kind of hilarious.
No, it is. It totally is. It's just off the mark, shall we say?
it's funny in the way that it makes me want to die.
I would actually love to talk about the Carpenters someday on this podcast. That would be fun.
Only we had a segment for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, Morgan, continue.
Something that I've often struggled with. I don't particularly enjoy watching things because they're bad in the sense of like, let's laugh at this. Because it just makes me bummed out. Because like the whole context of this record pushed aside, these people are just really bad at their instruments to a point where somebody should have told them no at some point. And the fact that no one told them no, and in fact were encouraged by a raving lunatic from the sounds of things, it takes it from really sad to outright horrific in a way that taints the music permanently. Much like with Trap Mask Replica. Although I find the content of this album more perverse because of that effect, where all the children are happy and gay. No, I don't think they fucking are, man. Is the thing about that. Yeah,
If they were gay, they'd be better guitarists.
that doesn't make any fucking sense, but sure. I'm so tired.
No, you make a good point. I feel like there's like in terms of music where it's just like veers so far into being stratospherically incompetent. Like Corey Feldman's Angelic to the Core is still like an album that dude put his soul into, and it's like you can kind of get it. Whereas you listen to this and it's just like, this just sounds like people poorly writing commercial jingles that they didn't even want to write to begin with. And so it's like it is sadder in that way. So I see that.
Like they got the IT department to write the jingles for a big corporation. No. Try again. Or don't.
I feel like Charlie Kaufman would make like a fucking biopic about this fucking family.
I'm okay with that. Not
I'm not saying I want it. I'm just saying it sounds like something he would do because it would be like, well, this is the bleakest thing ever. Might as well make it a movie.
Yeah. Well, I guess I can go.
Sure.
Please do.
So I want to dive into the lyrical content. Let's talk about that.
Please.
So I think it's very easy to discern like some of the moral values instilled into them by their father through the lyrics of this record. Obviously, there's the references to a religious figure, a savior, likely Jesus Christ, this being a record made in America. But one thing I think, first title track right off the bat speaks a lot to, I think, a bit of like what the father preached to them about satisfaction. I think one of the running things he must have brought them up to believe was to be satisfied with your place in the world, to not potentially like be envious of others, but to be happy with your position of the world, position in the world. This is kind of complemented by that little sports car and My Pal Foot Foot, which have this message about which My Little Sports Car has this. The story is obviously this girl goes chasing after a sports car and nearly gets herself killed, and it ends with the line, I learned never to roam or like stray too far from home, which that idea is also brought back up in My Pal Foot Foot. This idea of roaming and not roaming. There's like you can kind of see the disturbing degree of control which the father enforced over these girls, kind of not wanting them to inspire to bigger ambitions, not wanting them to like stray too far off of the path he had clearly set for them. And this is also reinforced by who are the parents, which obviously elevates their father to a godly status. He is always there. He always knows what's right, and he always is able to understand. And yeah, it speaks to this very sheltered, oppressive life, and and it's quite depressing. But I think what's complemented by that is the really sweeter romantic tracks, which paint this real picture of a childlike innocence, of just who these three are. Like these aren't like puppets their father's controlling. These are just three real teenage girls who just want to have a normal life and have been stripped of that. I mean, Why Do I Feel, I think, perfectly captures that. It's very it's gut-wrenching in a sense. The graphic detail you get about these girls' lives, just from reading the slightest bit into the lyrics, it's depressing. Not even, I wouldn't even say sad. I'd just say it makes me feel sad and depressed, and perhaps that's something Kurt Cobain could have seen, something people have seen in this record, this real idea of like a tortured artist beaming through this horrible sounding music. But that's kind of my take on it.
No, yeah,
Yeah.
that's good.
vibe
I
with
mean,
that.
more interesting take, yeah.
I really do vibe with that, and I cannot say that what you said about it is not at least at the very back of my head when I listen to it, and I think you express it very well.
Thank you.
Nice. Good review discussion. Bad album.
All right.
Yeah.
Favorite
Favorite
tracks?
track?
Question mark and ratings.
Ratings? Question mark.
I'll go first. Why not?
Okay, yeah,
go
let's
on.
do reversed order.
My favorite track is "Why Do I Exist" or whatever it's called. My least favorite track is fucking the one about the cat.
Food.
Food, yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Fucking Jesus.
The one about cat.
cat.
But even that's
I-
not like the least entertaining song here. So
I love Tom Hooper's Cats.
actually,
anyway.
no. The worst track on this record is "Who Are Parents" for a number of reasons. I'll go with that.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna give this album a big fat 1 out of 10.
1 out of
Nice.
10. All right.
So,
Saoirse.
my favorite tracks are. I'm struggling already. It's Halloween, I guess. I don't know. Philosophy of the World. Little Sports Car. My least favorite track is Who Are Parents. Jesus, I'm going to give this record a 2.5 out of 10.
Okay. Good rating.
Hey.
Look, it made me feel better about
No,
being alive.
No, that's no.
No,
That's not why I was laughing. I was laughing because you said that. I was expecting you to give it a positive rating.
Oh no! It's really
No,
bad. Don't
okay.
get me wrong. It's really bad.
No, all right. Fair enough. Fair
Fair
enough.
enough. Numbers.
Morgan.
What do they mean?
My favorite track is Chinese Satellite. My least favorite track is
Halloween.
What? Yeah, I almost did it. What's this family's real last name?
Wiggins.
Wiggins.
My least favorite track is is the dad's name Austin? Did I remember that right?
Or yeah, Austin.
Arthur.
You're right.
Okay, all right, whatever. That guy, he's my least favorite track. Burn in
Nice.
Hell. 0.5 out of 10.
Oh damn.
Nice.
All right. Favorite tracks. I guess fucking Philosophy of the World. Halloween. Why Do I Feel? Least favorite track. I mean, fuck, it's hard to pick. I'm gonna look up what the tracks are just so I can
My
name.
favorite
Let's
track
go. Probably Things I Wonder. Yeah, it's a horrible piece of shit. 9 out of 10.
I'm hesitating putting this in the Google document, August.
I'm giving it a 9 out of 10.
Okay. All right.
Make him put it in himself.
I'll put it in myself.
Okay. Put it. Go on. It's there for you.
Have to have some kind of accountability for this.
All right. It's done.
Okay.
My favorite track is actually I Tire of Earth. These people being caught in tangle of their lives.
Tonight, the bin man, we vacate Earth.
Okay,
Jake.
help me.
My three favorite tracks are Why, God, Why, Please End My Suffering. I'd really just want to die. I'm just calling out in the hopes that some faint noise may hear me and respond and will
Last
end
chance
my
to
fucking
evacuate the
suffering
podcast.
by killing me, even if it is slowly and agonizingly, if they do it for years and years on end in the hope that the pain will one day cease.
Great deep cut.
And also I really like 0.5. Fuck you.
Wow.
The bid is
My-
over.
Awesome.
My favorite track is this bit is failing me now because of my dumb fingers.
I like how despite the
my-
fact that August gave this a 9, it still has a lower standard
It
deviation
does.
than Trap Mask Replica.
Nice.
But my favorite track is this amazing opening line I read. The man in black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed. It's my favorite track. Anyway, that's a
Anyway.
2.7 out of 10.
The
Wait,
drought
boy.
had lasted now for 10 million years, and the reign of the terrible lizards had long since ended. Here on the equator, in the continent which would one day be known as Africa, the battle for existence had reached a new climax of ferocity, and the victor was not yet in sight. In this barren and desiccated land, only the small or the swift or the fierce could flourish, or even hope to survive. Arthur C. Clarke, 2001: A Space Odyssey.
To dream or not to dream. That
Okay,
is the
so
question.
we do not have an album.
Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune.
This album, sorry, the Dark Tower movie is to the Dark Tower books what this album is to philosophy.
It's the best
so-
thing to happen to it since Nietzsche.
we don't have an album rated at 2.7. The closest is at 2.6, which is Ultra Mono by Idols.
That's about right.
Still lower. I hate that
Yeah.
record more. So good.
Yeah.
That's a worse.
Burn in
that's
hell,
a-
Joe
That's
Talbot.
that's a worse record.
Yeah, I want to give the Shaggs a higher rating now that I know that.
Too late.
Mm,
Yeah, I don't want to do that.
Anyway, let's wrap this up. What are we
Sure.
covering next week?
So next week's Record Club
Green
is
Day.
on Green Day's 21st Century Breakdown. I'm sorry, I'm doing this announcement in the vocal style of this record we just discussed. This week we also talked about Mogwai and the Black Dresses. Go and watch that
Like
video.
to
If
Ladies and
speak.
gentlemen,
you have
the 9-inch nails.